George Walker Bush was born July 6, 1946 in New Haven, Connecticut. He is the eldest of 6 children. Since the 1950s, his family has had a big reputation for being involved in business and politics. His father is George Herbert Walker Bush, the president from 1989 to 1993, and his brother is Jeb Bush, governor of Florida. Bush was the Republican governor in Texas from 1995 to 2000. In 2000, he won a complicated presidential election against Democrat Al Gore.
After the Cold War, the Bush administration drastically changed their foreign policy, as they couldn't keep up with the rapid changes occurring in the Soviet Union. In 2003, Bush signed the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief and committed $15 billion to worldwide AIDS relief. In 2005, Bush signed the U.S.-India nuclear deal, which greatly improved the weakened relations between the two countries. After the 9/11 attack, the Bush administration declared the war on terror, stating that they would act preemptively to any group that threatened U.S. security. The war in Iraq waged on, as Bush used his foreign policy to invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein. He also condemned the axis of evil, or Iraq, Korea, and Iran, for their alleged use of weapons of mass destruction. As soon as Bush came into office, one of the first things that he did was withdraw U.S. support from the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. This was a result of the low U.S. economy, and this agreement was put into place to combat worldwide global warming.
The U.S. economy fell dangerously as Bush pulled a $1.35 trillion budget cut, announcing that the U.S. would not be able to abide by the Kyoto Protocol for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This was because Bush began his presidency with a federal budget surplus. The two wars in which the U.S. was fighting at the time, Iraq and Afghanistan, took a toll, and budget costs led to annual budget deficits in 2002, and in 2008, America started experiencing its worst financial crisis since the Great Depression.
Then came the unexpected. On September 11, 2001, 2 hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center and another one in the Pentagon. Hundreds were killed instantly, others were trapped in higher floors. Overall, 3,000 people died. Later that night, George W. Bush addressed his 9/11 speech to the nation. From then on, national security tightened, especially at airports and large stadiums.
In 2002, Bush declared the war on terror against al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. His two motives in his foreign policy were to protect U.S. security by trying to discover alleged weapons of mass destruction, as well as eliminate a major terrorist group in the Middle East. However, all throughout his presidency, Bush received major criticism for his actions in the Middle East by the American public.
Nothing could prevent the massive hurricane nature threw at America's way. When Hurricane Katrina hit on August 25, 2005, 2,000 people were killed and 15,000 were left as refugees. The government was very slow at responding. George W. Bush wasn't aware of the horrifying conditions of the Southeast. The Federal Emergency Management Agency took days to organize and help. Instead, it was the Coast Guard who rescued around 34,000 people in New Orleans who were stranded on top of their roofs in need of food, water, and shelter.
Bush's reputation and support plummeted after his infamously delayed reaction for aiding survivors after Hurricane Katrina. After photographs were released of him surveying the mass destruction left by Hurricane Katrina while on the way home from his vacation, Americans exploded in outrage as it made him seem detached and uncaring. After arriving back home, Bush declined to visit the devastated area right away, not wanting to draw attention away from the efforts of the rescue and recovery teams by diverting security and communications to himself. However, Bush allies later conceded that he should have quickly visited an area along the Gulf Coast with minimal disruption.
After the slow recovery of Hurricane Katrina, America was once again struck by disaster, this time an economic crisis of the housing market. More and more mortgages were given out to untrustworthy people who couldn't necessarily pay off their mortgages. Thus, many people defaulted. They stopped paying the mortgages and gave the houses to the bank. When the bank put the houses back on the market, no one bought them, leaving many of the banks bankrupt, causing the stock market to crash. People blamed the government since they didn't regulate the financial system sooner. They did, however, get an $800 billion budget to bail out the banks from bankruptcy.
Some important legislations that were passed under the Bush administration were the 2001 Economic Growth and Tax Relief Reconciliation Act, the 2002 Iraq War Resolution, the 2006 Iran Freedom and Support Act, the 2007 U.S. Troops Readiness, Veterans Care, Katrina Recovery, and Iraq Accountability and Appropriations Act, and the 2008 Post 9/11 Veterans Educational Assistance Act.
Bush left his legacy as one of the most controversial presidents. After Hurricane Katrina, Bush responded slowly, and the victims felt he was incompetent. Due to his failure to effectively respond, Bush's and America's good reputation was ruined. His slow reaction and the weak federal, state, and local response to the hurricane undermined Bush's reputation for being an effective crisis manager and a decisive leader. His reputation never improved, even though he later made repeated visits to the hurricane zone and put billions of federal dollars into recovery programs. His image as an effective decision-maker was gone after he failed to act while thousands of desperate people were beseeching help on national television. During his presidency, America was in a war with Iraq, and the Abu Ghraib prison acted as a detention camp for the captured Iraqis. The prison held 3,800 people at its peak as they were tortured and humiliated. Upon finding out, the public was shocked and outraged by Bush, and the people of Iraq lost faith in America. The morale of the U.S. troops in Iraq plummeted. Several images were published showing the abuse, demolishing Bush's reputation. Many people lost respect for him and resented him and his presidency due to his indirect approval of the cruel treatment. Bush was the most prominent president of the War on Terror. His main platform to counter the attacks was to remain strong and prevent the terrorists from seeing any weakness. He announced his proposal after the 9/11 attacks, showing his devotion to the country's safety and persistence to defeat the terrorists. He promised that America would hunt down the terrorists and assured the people that swift justice would be received. He promised to use the military as a force against threats to the U.S., and as previously mentioned, Bush revamped his foreign policy with the Bush Doctrine. He acted very quickly, pleasing the American public. The war on terrorism proceeds today due to Bush, yet right now there is no end in sight.